Hey everyone, welcome to this special program, India and Canada. Been through a rough period, but now seem to be hitting the reset button. Prime Minister Modi and the Canadian Prime Minister Markani just spoken, the trilateral being set up, and all sorts of efforts are being taken to get the relationship back on track. So joining me to talk about that, it's a great pleasure to have Minister Victor Fedeli, who's from Ontario, who's the Minister driving economic development, job creation, trade, all of that for Ontario. And hey, Ontario is important because, 40% of Canadian GDP, I think.
Absolutely.
And you've really been working a lot on getting that relationship going. And Vina, it's great to be talking to you again. Vina Nadjibulla is Vice President, Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. Been working a lot on track 2 and other things, getting the relationship going. I remember, Vina, when in the stormier days, you and I often used to speak, and we attended some track 2 conversations saying, how does the relationship, get back on track?
Absolutely.
And it seems as if it's starting to happen. Yeah, it's looking as if it's starting to happen. But let me start off with you, Minister Fedeli. How is it looking? The fact that you're in Delhi in November is not strictly advisable. Next time, please come in February. The air is not the best at this time of the year. But are the vibes much better? Is the political air much better now between India and Canada?
Well, to be perfectly frank, we do come in February and November. Those are the 2 times a year that we like to come. In what I would say, in good times or bad, we leave the geopolitical aspect to the federal government. I'm here from one of the provinces, Ontario, and we're always here to say the fundamentals in Ontario are no different. So the last time we came, that was our big message to the broader media was, the business fundamentals haven't changed in Ontario. So we met already this trip, many of the companies we've met with before that we've lured to Ontario to expand. So it's business as usual.
And that's an interesting clarification also, because sometimes observers here in India aren't entirely aware that the provincial governments are very different to the federal government, and the business that is being driven by the provincial governments quite often. Even the political parties aren't the same. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit. How does it actually work?
Well, in Canada we have 10 provinces and 3 territories, all various different political parties, and we're basically we work with the federal government on all aspects. When you think about education, that's a provincial issue. Think about transportation, provincial issue. Even critical minerals, which I hope we talk about, that's a provincial issue without federal government sort of intervening.
So, I'm going to come and talk about all of that, but Vina, if I could just ask you, the big broad picture. We were talking in February about maybe someday a reset button will be clicked. Do you think it has been?
Absolutely. I think the reset is well underway. It began in June when our 2 prime ministers met on the margins of the G7, when Prime Minister Carney invited Prime Minister Modi, and Prime Minister Modi accepted that invitation. So they set that political reset in motion. And I think the meetings that just took place on the margins of the G20, literally over the weekend, showed that momentum is accelerating and it's gaining momentum. And not only in the bilateral relationship, but also in the announcements of a trilateral between India, Canada, and Australia, which is incidentally the first trilateral we have in the Indo-Pacific region. So it's quite significant, I think, and the fact that it's on technology and innovation, I think is significant. It's something that both governments in Canada and in India care about, and obviously Australia has a lot to bring to this as well. So I think we're clearly seeing that there's political will on both sides, both in Canada and India. There's now political will at the highest level to rebuild the relationship and to take it to another level, not just reset to where we were 2 years ago. I think the level of ambition is higher. The level of ambition now is to have a relationship that's much more fit for purpose in the current global moment, where both India and Canada need each other much more as they try to reduce over-reliance on the US and continue to manage their relationship with China.
Right, of course, those are challenges that I'm going to be discussing with both of you. There have been major speed bumps in the relationship between India and Canada. And I think it's useful to address them, and I'll come to that in a short while to see the issues that had derailed the relationship. Are they fixed? Are they going to be fixed, and how do we move? But she was talking about the relationship with the US. The fact that you're here in India and the fact that Canada is looking at a number of partners in other parts of the world, is that also being driven by the fact that perhaps the relationship with your southern neighbor, which was very important for Ontario at the end of the day, is not something perhaps you can bank on as much as you were just 10 months or 12 months ago?
Well, most of us in Canada no longer feel that the United States is a reliable partner. We've seen how we've been treated by them, how they talk about us as a 51st state. They joke about it. Sometimes I think they're serious as well. But my instructions from my boss, the Premier of Ontario, are no more north-south. You're going east-west around the world. And I reminded him, I said, that's absolutely important and critical. But last year in Ontario, we landed 409 international companies into our province. They invested $40 billion and hired 24,711 people. So it's not as if this is new, traveling around. I've been to India every year, basically since I became the minister in 2018. But I think I call it the Trump accelerator. He's certainly driven us away and put us in the arms of other countries. So this is my 20th country this year alone to visit, including many first-time countries.
So that's a very strong and clear statement that is coming from you, because when you've got the world's largest economy, across the border, and it's such an open border, from you just go across past the Niagara Falls and you are there in Detroit, and it is a very important relationship. But you're saying that this is almost like a fundamental rethinking, that we have to hedge our bets and look at other countries.
Well, absolutely. We are so reliant. Anybody who's in sales, if you can't get on an airplane in the morning, go down to the United States with a 70-cent dollar that we have, fill your order book, and be back for dinner. If you can't do that successfully, you shouldn't be with the company any longer. And that's why 80% of our trade from Ontario is with the United States. $500 billion a year in two-way trade, split evenly. And 125 billion with the rest of the world. So that's really
when you are
balance.
looking at countries like India, when you're looking at other places from a position of Ontario, I guess what the question people will have is that, is this a short-term thing while Trump is there, and then Trump is going to go, and India and US and Canada will be back to normal, and then the reliance on the rest of the world will go down? Or are you seeing real benefits when you're in countries like India to say, no, we really need to think about this in any case as a long-term exercise?
So we've been coming since we took government in 2018. And since that day, our trade with India has increased 59%. So we've been at this and working really hard at it year after year, speed bumps or not. We're here in good times and bad and still doing business with Indian companies. Two-way trade, and it's been, as I say, up 59%, so it's been very successful being here. Just being here alone is part of the success.
Vina, to your mind, the reset button, if it's being pressed, is it a desire for the two countries to say, look, let's move past the speed bumps, or is it being driven by that Trump factor and the US factor? By the way, both countries are having their own set of issues with the US right now.
Yeah, I think even before the Liberation Day tariffs and before the disruptions under second Trump presidency, there was a desire to find a constructive path forward between Canada and India. Yes, we had a diplomatic crisis, but as we talked about in our Track 2 discussions over the course of last year, there's too much at stake for the relationship to just be left at that kind of situation that we found ourselves in diplomatic freeze. So I think the desire to rebuild and find a constructive path forward was already there. I think President Trump and the policies are just accelerating everything and have completely changed the game in terms of what's possible. So, because we've been talking about diversification for 40 years, and India, being the large economy that it is, has always been part of that equation. And in fact, in our Indo-Pacific strategy from the federal government that came out in 2022, it was named as a critical partner. So in other words, the desire to do more with India was already there. We had the crisis, movement was happening towards rebuilding relations, and now we're seeing that there's a genuine political leadership, and leadership matters. So I mean, I think we can be frank about that. The election of Prime Minister Carney has shifted the way Canada is approaching a lot of its relationships, certainly with India, but also more generally. Minister mentioned that he's been to 20 countries. I think in the last 6 months, our Prime Minister probably has also been to 20 countries and has had many, many discussions with leaders around doing more with Canada, finding reliable partners, diversifying our economic as well as defense and security relationships. And India is absolutely central to that diversification agenda, given the complementarity of our economies, as I mentioned, given India's scale, given the enormous people-to-people ties that we already have, and a robust economic relationship that we have. Our Prime Minister said they want to bring the bilateral trading relationship to 50 billion by 2030. That's doubling it, both in goods and in services. That's significant.
Right. When you look at India, and you say you've been here every year for 6-7 years, are you looking at the market? Are you looking at the people who could be a source of talent? Are you looking for an avenue of investment in both ways? Which of them is really catching your attention?
So yes, yes, and yes. We look at India as a great place for investment to come in. For our pension funds, we can't have it all in Canada. They need to diversify geographically and sectorally. And India is a great place for them to be. And I think they're all doing extremely well here. So that's an important part. I won't say that's the most important, but it's a critical piece. We look for India's tech companies to grow and expand. And if they need a North American foothold, it should be in Canada, and it should be in the province of Ontario, where we're the second largest tech cluster in all of North America. By the way, we're also like the second largest automobile producer in North America. We're the second largest fintech cluster in North America. So we are a real global leader. So we look for these tech companies to come and look at our talent. We graduate 86,000 STEM grads every year. We just put in the budget for 20,000 more permanent seats. So it's our talent that they really come for. I mean, there's not a lot of manufacturing that I think is going to move from India to Ontario, but we need pharmaceuticals from India, the APIs, so that we can make our own pharmaceuticals. So there's a good life sciences, there's a good tech, and there's relatively good advanced manufacturing that we need.
So one of the obvious opportunities that seems to come to mind, and I know that that those conversations were happening even before all the derailing and the disruption happened, which was the possibility of Indian talent, right? The people who are going right now to Silicon Valley and other places and setting up companies and doing really well, they're feeling really unwelcome in the United States with H-1B and the rest of it. And it sounds to me as if countries like Canada are also saying, why don't you come here? Why don't you come, instead of going to Silicon Valley, why don't you come to Ontario, come outside the University of Toronto, come there, get people from those universities to come out and start setting up their own base out there. Is that a high priority for you?
Oh, absolutely. It was enhanced this summer by President Trump kicking out of Georgia, the state of Georgia, the Hyundai workers, 300 of them. Basically rounded them up and sent them home. Now they were there to install first ever equipment in a Hyundai plant, of which they invested billions, to train the people and then go home. So we've seen the kind of messaging and the notion of 100,000 for an H-1B visa. A year ago, July, it started with the notion of a Trump presidency. We saw in 48 hours, we had 10,000 California H-1B visa holders apply in Ontario to come to Ontario. That's the migration that we're seeing, and we'll take advantage of that, certainly.
So the specific path that you will give, look, there was a period where a lot of people were migrating into Canada or coming to Canada, including from India, right? But it was not very clear which areas they were being persuaded into. Was there a selection process or not taking place? many countries now seem to be specifically trying to get high caliber people, entrepreneurs, people who are with advanced degrees. Some people come to Canada and they go to unknown education institutions and then they're out there saying, okay, now what are we going to do with the student visa? Are you trying to make a difference and saying, no, you come to one of the better known universities, of which Ontario has many, and then we will try and find places for you?
It's a little bit of a mixed bag. We have both universities and colleges, which would be applied arts or applied science colleges. So we have a tremendous volume of students, whether they're taking our aircraft maintenance and engineering program, or whether they're taking other community college type programs or university degrees. We look at a real heavy reliance on students from India. They love coming to Canada and Ontario, and we love having them there. But also from an economic perspective, we have more of entrepreneur programs as well. You bring X hundreds of thousands of dollars and you can do this with it. So there's a real combination of requirements. We've seen a bit of a stall from the federal government in the allowance of students, which is causing concern, and we're trying to address that properly, but it is a bit of a concern for our colleges who've relied on international students for so long.
That's the reason I'm asking is because a lot of young people watch, digital programs like this, and many of them were thinking of Canada and, the USA as places to go, and now the USA seems to be dropping off. Your message to them would be to keep on thinking of Canada.
Absolutely. You come to Canada, get your education, and you're going to get one of those 434,000 tech jobs that are in the province of Ontario. We have 1,800 AI masters right now. We have 400 AI firms, 85,000 AI employees. Come to Ontario. Enjoy Niagara Falls on the weekend, but come to Ontario, all through the vast province of Ontario.
Right, so that's some of the good stuff. Can I now go to some of the stuff that was,
You get the bad stuff.
Yeah, I wouldn't ask for some of the bad stuff.
The role of civil society, yes.
Yeah, because let's face it, as we've often discussed in the past, some of those people of Indian origin went in the past,
yes,
have also been, the source for some of the trouble right now. I'm talking about extremists who have,
yes,
Khalistani extremists and others, whom India has often felt have got been, I think coddled is the word that used, allowed to spread, secessionism and terrorist messaging for a period of time. India has felt that Canada has winked at that or allowed that to continue. Canada has felt very upset about things like the Niger assassination and its aftermath. So, two elephants in the room, let's face it. Are we getting anywhere with either of those?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things in your question. There's a lot there. One, when we talk about the Indo-Canadian community, it's a diverse, more than 1.5 million Indo-Canadians. Most of them obviously are, majority, 99% of them are peaceful and have nothing to do with any of the issues around separatism, Khalistan, extremism, all of that, right? So I think that's an important
Including the
point.
Vast majority of people of the Sikh community. It's important to say that.
Absolutely. So I think that's point number one, and we have to be really extremely clear about that. In terms of are the issues that really came to the fore after the Niger assassination, are those issues gone away? No. We still have those frictions and they need to be dealt with. I think they need to be dealt with in law enforcement channels. They cannot be dealt with through political rhetoric. And it's good to see that in the last 6 months, that's exactly what's happening. They're being dealt with in channels between our law enforcement agencies and Indians. There's dialogue now. We understand senior levels of national security, an intelligence advisor, head of CSIS, RCMP, were here. They're discussing that. That's important, but it will take time, Vikram. You can't rebuild trust through 1 or 2 meetings. The issues go back 40 years plus. To Air India bombing and so forth. So it's going to take time to rebuild trust, to better understand each other, to understand each other's concerns. So on Canada, we need to be much more sensitive to what India is saying, to how India is understanding issues around Khalistan, around Sikh extremism, not just in Canada, but also US, Australia, and others. This is not a uniquely Canadian issue, although in Canada, because of the numbers, it's slightly bigger. But so we need to be much more sensitive. We need to understand that even though from our perspective, this isn't a big issue, in the context of India, you've had prime ministers assassinated. This history is...
It's a red line, and I think,
yes.
I think that's something which perhaps that explanation has to be done. Like tens of thousands of people died as a result of the terrorism that happened in Punjab.
Absolutely.
And when you're seeing people in Canada, not in India, in Indian Punjab, if you go there, there's no signs of this anywhere, but you're seeing people in Canada expressing sympathy for Khalistan and displaying pictures of Indian prime ministers being shot and calling, in a sense, for violence and saying, don't fly in Air India planes anymore. Okay, some of that messaging comes from New York also, from Panun.
Yes.
From Panun. But when those images come, in India, the messaging which goes out is, this is happening for a certain political, certain ridings in Canada where to get that done. So I'm sure there has to be a way of going past this. So a certain amount of sensitivity perhaps is called for.
So yes, so we need to be much more aware and understand the sensitivities. But on the other hand, I think India also needs to understand that assassination of a Canadian on Canadian soil by agents of a foreign government is a red line. It's a red line that crosses sovereignty, that is a violation of our national security, and so forth. So I think there are red lines on both sides, and both need to be better at explaining them, at being able to then look at how we manage these relationships. And also looking at the problem as a shared issue, because to the extent that there is an organized crime element, to the extent that there is an extremist element, that's a concern, that's a public safety issue for both countries. That's a shared problem, and it's in the interests of Canada and India to resolve it.
So again, that's something where law enforcement can talk to together, and the two sometimes do link up. I think from the Indian side, you quite often hear that same investigation into Niger, the Niger assassination, is pointing to some of the criminal gangs, including people whose extradition has been called for. So maybe the law enforcement needs to look at that aspect and work closely in it. If the criminal gangs are wound up, it's good for both countries.
Well, and exactly why, just recently, the Bishnoi Group was named as a terrorist organization in Canada, which now gives our law enforcement more tools to be able to deal with them. So there are things that are now happening, I think, and we're seeing that both inside Canada in terms of taking this issue more seriously, in terms of addressing organized crime and extortion that's happening in our communities, right? I live in British Columbia, I live in Vancouver, Surrey, BC. These are issues that are affecting local community as well, and it's something that we want to address for those reasons.
So from the point of view of our audience, in India, which is watching this, the question of, the pandering to Khalistani extremists as a political factor in Canada, actually, if you think about it, I would not be quite sure why that should be happening at all. And the reason for that is clear, because, 10% or 5% of even the Sikh population would be Khalistan supporters. The rest of the people who are Indo-Canadians would be very upset by what is happening out there, and if that affects their visas and their ability to come back and forth. And I'm sure Canadians who have nothing to do with this would be saying, why are these foreign issues being played out on Canadian soil to start with? So I'm sure politically also, and especially after this recent election where I don't think the NDP won even in Brampton and other things, is there now a sense that it doesn't make sense to be coddling extremism?
I don't think there was ever a sense in Canada that there was pandering or coddling of extremism. So I think that's a narrative. That's a narrative that's playing out here, and I don't think that narrative is accurate, and certainly not how Canadians see it. From our perspective, to the extent that Canadians pay attention to this issue, there also has to be an understanding that an average Canadian isn't spending a lot of time thinking about Sikh extremism or Khalistan issues. They wouldn't even know what Khalistan really is all about. What Canadians see is the fact that there has been an assassination on Canadian soil, that Canadian government, that our own then Prime Minister, stood up in the House of Parliament and basically said there were links to Indian government in that assassination, and that allegation is a very serious one, and that's the issue that people really started to pay attention to. Prior to 2 years ago, very few Canadians were actually spending a lot of time on the question of Khalistan or Sikh separatism. Now that the issue has been framed as a rule of law issue, as a violation of sovereignty issue, as a national security issue. Canadians want to know what happened to that. What's the resolution? What's a mechanism by which Canada and India will deal with it? With respect to sort of elections and pandering, I think that's a narrative that we need to deal with. Now, there is an element of diaspora politics influencing Canadian foreign policy. Again, not just on the case of India, but in the case of Sri Lanka, in the case of China, and other things. And we are seeing more of a debate in Canada about that, and the need to have our foreign policy be much more in service of national interests rather than sometimes sort of focus on the interests of perhaps a very vocal minority of a particular diaspora community. Yeah. So I think we are seeing that shift. That's also a language that's changed. I mean, you see Prime Minister Carney is definitely speaking in a different way than I think our previous Prime Minister.
And I think so to look at this as a permanent sort of a reset. I think what I'm hearing from you also is that clearly there's no point in talking past each other on these issues. It's a question of looking at red lines. And, Canada has said there's obviously concerns around foreign interference with the rule of law are obviously important for the Canadian side. Now, I know the Indian side has said there's no evidence that the Indian government had anything to do with it. All of this will, I presume, come out at the time of the trial. And at the same time, the sensitivities around terrorism and extremism have to be reflected. That the path forward, you would say?
Well, I mean, to kind of pick up on what you're saying, it's always helpful to speak with each other rather than past each other. So I think, yes, absolutely. To the extent
Sit and have a actual conversation.
To the extent that we actually...
Like, as you can see, Vina and I have been doing this for a while, talking about, we have to start,
yes. No,
understanding the concerns on both sides.
Absolutely. And come to these conversations in good faith, in a genuine desire to understand each other, and to recognize that it will take time. And the way we frame an issue is also important, right? This is not a Canada problem. This is not an India problem. This is a shared issue that we're trying to address. And while we are doing that through the appropriate law enforcement channels, we also have the rest of the relationship, which is important and matters to both countries on the economic side, on the diplomatic side, on education, people-to-people ties. There's so much more to this relationship. And this is what I think we need to now be focusing on. How do we build resilience and depth in the relationship such that when we do have these challenges, and they will continue to exist, there's no way around that, that when we have these challenges, the whole relationship doesn't fall apart, that we have a way of dealing with them and having the hard conversations.
It was actually interesting the extent to which this relationship, fell apart.
Yes.
And it almost, I'm sure it took you by surprise. It certainly took me by surprise. But perhaps the way it was done now,
yes.
It's maybe it could have been handled in a different manner. Very similar, the India-US relationship went past that before
yes.
the tariffs came in.
Yes.
Hit that particular relationship. So let's see how that goes. But from your point of view, when it comes to the political will of saying let's pursue relations with India and let's recognize India as a potential major partner for Canada, is there any doubt left on that, or is that now back on?
I would think there's no doubt now. Just yesterday, our Prime Minister came out and said India is a reliable partner, period. There we go. We're hopefully now with the CETA, the comprehensive economic agreement, and I think comprehensive is an important word. It will be all-encompassing, and I don't think it's a reset of the previous engagement. I think this is now going to be a new start of a new, fully comprehensive trade agreement. And I think both countries have heard loud and clear from their prime ministers.
What you said about looking west and east instead of just south, let's face it, the world is changing. That old era of a unipolar world that has existed for the last 20, 30 years seems to be changing. There's certainly China, which has emerged as a major power, but increasingly, if you look out 10 years or 15 years, it's looking like more and more of a multipolar world where there's Canada, Europe as a potential axis. India will certainly be the third largest economy in the world. You'll have, China there, the US there. Is that the way you're also looking at the world? And when you're doing your part about looking at trade all around the world, is that the way you're seeing it?
Start by looking back. Since World War II, we've had really interesting and settled trading relationships. I think all of that is gone now. here we are in India, and they're talking about Europe, India, Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea, Canada, Mexico, South America, but there's no mention of the United States and there's no mention of China. It's really interesting, this east-west pull that we're seeing without two of the large trading partners. They're just completely being ignored, and we're going to focus on each other and make sure we have business with each other.
That's a really, really interesting way of phrasing it. So you're saying that now, there was always often talk about India being one of the poles in a China +1 situation. You're saying you're now really looking at it as a potentially +1 to both China and the US, multitude of other relationships having to come up.
Not only I'm saying that, it's what I felt in our visit here in India, is that India, the Indian companies, there are organizations that we've met with that feel that way. This is how do we move forward without the United States, and how do we move forward, by the way, without China?
Is that the way you also think? I mean, you've done so much work on China, and you know, this entire era has been there that, look, we have to find a balance against China, including the India relationship. The US used to look at India as a, alternative, as a balance to China. Is that the way Canada also has seen it, and is that the way it's going to continue, or is it just the dynamics are changing in general?
Look, so I mean, US is the largest economy, China is the second largest economy. In the case of Canada, we will diversify, but we're still going to do a lot with the US. There is no mathematical formula by which we will be doing zero trade with the US. That simply can't happen. So this is US plus strategy in some ways, because we want to have a stable relationship with the US to the extent possible, preserve as much of our market access as we can. And at the same time, we need to medium term and long term diversify and not have 76% of our exports going to just one market. So that's just common sense, and we have to do that. Now, China is the second largest market, and China is the country that first began to undermine global order, rules-based trade. So we're all focusing on President Trump and the Liberation Day tariffs and so forth. And however much we disagree with how US has gone about it, we have to recognize that the global order was already under duress because of China's policies. Because for the last 20 years, China was essentially taking advantage of rules-based trade without playing by those rules. And so that imbalance was unsustainable, and something needed to change. The way US is going about it, again, is not how many of us would like it to go, but the status quo was untenable and change was necessary. So in that context, with the two largest economies now opting out of rules-based trade and going very much towards nationalistic protectionist policies, it poses really difficult questions to all other countries, especially countries like Canada that are dependent on trade, that have bought into the idea of integration and globalization. So what do? They have basically 2 or 3 choices. They can try to be protectionists themselves, but of course, because they're smaller, they're going to lose. They can try to come together and create these islands of rules-based trade that don't include US and China, and that's a direction we're certainly seeing from our Prime Minister as well as a number of others. So Singapore and others, they've even come up with a group of Friends for International Trade and so forth, kind of smaller economies. Our Prime Minister just at the G20 held a meeting between CPTPP and EU, CPTPP being represented by Vietnam, which is going to be the chair of the CPTPP, and that's Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. We can thank Canada for adding the comprehensive and progressive to make the acronym just impossible to say. Yeah. But nonetheless, so this idea that...
I'm so glad I didn't have to ask you a follow-up question on that.
What it is, yes. No, I've been saying it a lot. So between the CPTPP, this trading bloc in Asia and the Indo-Pacific that now also includes UK, and Europe, you have about 30% of the global market. Right? So that begins to compete now with China and the US, right? And there, if we can keep that rules-based trade and bring others into it, then we have a chance of surviving, right? Otherwise, it's going to be really difficult. Bilaterally negotiating with the US, bilaterally defending ourselves against China, it's a losing proposition. We have to come together, and we have to continue to invest in rules-based trade and integration in a win-win kind of trade, while at the same time, obviously, engaging in economic security, protecting ourselves, supply chain resilience, and on issues like critical minerals, I mean, we are 25 years behind China, let's be honest, right? China now has a dominant position. So both the minister and I are here in Delhi this time around for a dialogue on critical minerals, especially, given how much of a focus this now has to be. We're all essentially at the mercy now of the Chinese Communist Party and their policies on whether or not they will grant a license for export of raw materials, rare earth minerals that are central to everything. Defense.
It doesn't help to first make them know that they have power by threatening tariffs and having to withdraw them because they threaten to withhold rare earths. So
China
in a
shows
sense,
leverage.
the US has given China evidence of the fact that they have leverage. But
Well, it's clear,
And the
yes.
problem with that is that China has weaponized
Yes.
critical minerals.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
we'll pivot to Ontario for a moment. We have every mineral required to build a lithium-ion battery in Ontario. We're mining those now, whether it's nickel, which we've had for generations in Sudbury, Ontario, at one time the largest nickel producer in the world. We're now mining lithium and then processing the lithium into lithium hydroxide for the lithium-ion batteries. We're processing cobalt in the town of Cobalt, Ontario. So we're opening about another 10 mines in the future. We have a critical mineral processing fund, which says to the world, come and help us process our minerals and get the value added in Ontario. We're seeing a company from Mitsubishi from Japan came and invested in a company called Frontier Lithium to help with their lithium mine and the processing of lithium. All of this is going on under the knowledge that this weaponization of all of the critical minerals, that we've got the solution in Ontario. It's not going to be the be-all to end-all, but if all of these mines open and all of the processing happens, then we should at least be able to hold that up as a beacon to the rest.
Minister Fedeli, as we end this, let me just come back to the big picture between India and Canada, because yes, this entire new world order has to be put together, but sometimes if there are countries which are complementary in what they bring to the table, it makes it a really attractive proposition. And you could argue that India and Canada are as complementary as they get, right? Canada, large country, all those minerals that you were talking about, lots of resources, investment money, technology, and universities, in places like Ontario and others. India, its own strength, the market, the people, the talent it can bring, the companies, this amount of growth that is taking place here now, third largest economy in the world. Possibly a very good complementary fit, if you can get the... Is that the way you would look at it also?
Absolutely. We have so much in common. We have so many Indians who live in Ontario right now. I live in a very small town of 56,000 people. We're building a cricket pitch right now, right this very moment, for our Indian community that we have. We have a mosque, we have a temple. Like, it's really the dynamics of small towns in Ontario is changing.
Indo-Canadians are like 5-6% of the population now, so that's another thing that potentially... Your final thoughts on this? Are we going to... Is the good stuff going to happen, or are those elephants in the room that we were discussing going to continue to derail?
No, I'm very much an optimist. I think back in February we said there was an elephant in the room blocking the door. Now the elephant is very much in the corner. The door is open. I think the opportunities are there for us to engage on. There's tremendous potential in the relationship. So to your question, are our economies complementary? Yes. And it's more than that. We also have common perspectives on the kind of world we want to build, the sort of a multilateral rules-based world in which you don't have either China or US completely dominating the system. So I think there's a lot that we can do bilaterally. There's a lot that we can do multilaterally, just even seeing what happened at the G20. I mean, remember, it was Canada's thought leadership that even led to the creation of G20. So there's an opportunity for us now to work together on issues of climate change, on public goods that are relevant not just to our own peoples, but to the world as a whole. So I think the relationship has tremendous, tremendous potential. It has never fully lived up to that potential, let's be honest. We've gone through lots of ups and downs. I'm hoping that in this period, as we rebuild, we focus on building with a lot more depth and resilience so that finally the potential can be actualized.
Right. Mr. Fedeli, last word from you for people watching this?
I think both Canada and India, we like each other as well. I think that's a really important part. It's all part of the really beautiful dance that we have going on, and we're just really, really thrilled to be able to see so much being able to be shared with both countries.
Well, that's one thing that we can give Donald Trump credit for, helping perhaps in accelerating the pressing of this reset button. But it was wonderful talking to both of you, Vina.
Thank you.
Pleasure
Thanks, Vikram.
meeting you again, Minister Fedeli. Thank you so much for joining us.